survival. They're consumed by getting through the challenges which extreme temperatures have created, which have led to more rural migration. They're consumed by dealing with the events or the impact of the flood events, of the extreme weather conditions. So the mobilization that they do is not in the way that Fridays for Future is done, but it's just as important. And from my perspective, with this platform, I think it's so important for us all to not only be thinking about the emissions and cutting them down, but recognizing that because, as the Mayor of Salvador said, 7 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, nothing was done about adaptation, and frankly, not much was done about stopping the emissions. Here we are today. We've also got to, at the same time as we talk about stopping emissions, we've got to recognize that there are millions of people whose lives are now at risk, whose livelihoods are now at risk, whose children's future is very much in doubt. So our dual path has to be dealing with the emission reduction, but also that divest, invest has got to be about adaptation, has got to be about investing in those communities, principally in the global south, but not exclusively. So when we talk about activism, with Women for Climate, just in August, and it was poignant because on the 14th of August, we launched the Women for Climate Mentorship Program, inviting and creating a platform, working with Mayor Anne Hidalgo and her team, creating a platform for young women, or any women really, to join us, and we support them in coming up with climate solutions. The very next day, we had one of those extreme weather conditions. There was a terrible flood, and young people, in fact, the 4 people who died, were all under the age of 22.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And also thank you very much for reminding us that people in politics, they do not come out of the blue. They are not born like people who don't care about a thing. They actually often are going into politics because they are exactly interested in making an improvement in society. So thank you very much for reminding us that. Maybe I thought there is sort of a contradiction somehow between being the activist, going out there, saying what you want, and having your cause. And then the reality that sometimes change takes time. Politics and decisions takes time. And many of us are impatient. But how can we sort of build a bridge between these things so that we will not end up in a lot of frustrated young people and other people being frustrated because things are not happening as fast as they should? How can we sort of align these things? What needs to be changed where? I know it's a big question, but I think it's quite important because I could fear that we would soon see some kind of frustrated polarization. What is your thinking about that?
Well, I think we have a lot of examples of where mass movements have helped create the political conditions for political decisions to take place. And it's when those two forces are able to work in alignment with each other that we see not only the most aggressive and ambitious policies being taken, but we also see the movement get strengthened. And we see examples of this in the recent decision just today in Brazil for 4 oil blocks to be stopped from being permitted in a coral reef area. This was an example of an activist movement that mobilized in these hearings, and the decision was taken not to do it, and the decision was credited to the work of the activists in pushing them to do it. And when we see examples like this, it helps both sides, because it helps those of us who are trying to create political space and those, most of you in this room, who are walking through it and who are helping guide these visionary agendas. So I think it's so important in this moment. The next few years are so crucially important that our starting point not be a dichotomy between what has to happen and what can happen, but a commitment to the vision of what is required, and that all of us are actually partners in getting there together. because that's what is happening on the streets right now. That is the call for action. And some people ask, oh, well, the message isn't really clear. I don't really know what's being asked for. How many people in this room are confused about what is being demanded by young people? I thought so. We all understand what has to be taken into account. We all understand what the science is saying. We all understand what the demands of climate justice require. And so it's up to all of us to be creative. And of course, it's going to be challenging, but we have to keep our commitment to that possibility. Otherwise, this is exactly what the fossil fuel industry wants us to do. They want us to be caught in a fight amongst each other about ambition versus reality. And it's our job to not give in to that false dichotomy and fight for what's right.
Mayor Netto, could I ask you to sort of comment on what we just heard here, the same problem?
Bom, de fato,
Indeed, timing is not always met with the same urgency by the authorities. But I'd like to add something to your presentation that for me is very important. In this enormous planet, we have very diverse situations in different countries, especially when you compare a rich country and a poor country. In the poorer countries, we cannot close our eyes to discussing financing. For example, the renewal of the public transportation fleet, one of the greatest pollutants in Latin America and doubtlessly in the case of Brazil. It's impossible to renew the fleet of public transport, replacing that with e-buses, unless we discuss financing. And this financing, many times, is not only limited to the country. It has to be a greater debate beyond the boundaries. When we talk about implementing resilience plans, we do have a resilient plan that is quite ambitious for Salvador, and we wish Salvador to be carbon neutral by 2049, when Salvador becomes 500 years old. But we need to act fast, because society wants us to act fast. But to do that, we need resources. And the authorities don't have the resources all the time. So this is why it's essential that we keep in mind that the debate on financing has to be global. It has to be global.
And Mayor Ocasio, if you should point to sort of one barrier that you see from your office as a mayor for speeding up action, where does that lie?
I would say the financing point is a really important one, but I think another issue is information. One of the things which has been so striking over the course of the last few days is how much I've learned. And I think my view is that the movement that we see here in the West has been fueled by information, by people understanding better and more. And today, when the young people were in the press conference, what they said was they wanted more information out there. A barrier to change is when people don't feel the sense of urgency. And often that is because they don't understand. And it's not just a question of putting the facts and figures out there in a context that relates to the West, but breaking it down so it relates to somebody in Ecuador, it relates to somebody in Bangladesh, it relates to somebody in Freetown. So I would say that having, and even that requires financing. You know, our campaigns to get the message out, our campaigns to build in resilience, our campaigns to actually do the work required is going to take financing. We also have political will issues and challenges between national and local governments and where mandates state. I've been committed from the very first day I got into office to wanting to put a ban on single-use plastic. I haven't been able to do so because it's not my mandate. And I'm needing to negotiate and engage with central government to get that done. And I know this is true of many other mayors in their situations, maybe for different issues. So that's also, so I would say around that, the role of the public in getting that information helps put the pressure on the central government, and indeed even on subnational governments who aren't really getting the message. So financing, information, and the relationship between that and the citizens.
Very clear messages. Thanks a lot for that. Here in conclusion, I would like each of you, just 20 seconds or so, come up with sort of your wish. Namely, for the young people here, our activists, to think about if you had one wish for mayors to take home, what would that be? And we would start with the mayors. If you had one wish the other way around, what would your number one wish be? Let's start with Mayor Neto, and I will come to you also, but Mayor Neto.
Well, my main wish with regard to the youth is that they do not lose hope, do not cease to believe. They have to know that they are the main actors of transformation of our present. And this connected world, in this connected world, the future of the world, its balance and sustainability will depend on the activism and the presence and energy of the young people. Depends on them.
And May Bowen?
I would say political courage, and I would point out that the word for courage comes from the word for heart. And we all know the decisions we would take if we weren't afraid. The most important things that we could do in our organizations, in our cities, in our youth movements. Those are the steps we all have to be taking. That's my wish.
And Yvonne Akisoya?
My wish would be that the youth no longer have to feel that they're in this on their own. And as so many of them have said over the last few days, they feel scared about their future. And that will happen when we join the dots. We need the dots to be joined. Around the world, there are many people who feel this way. The stronger we are together, the closer we are together, the more effective we will be in making the difference that has to happen now.
Thank you. And Anton, your wish number one to the mayors of the world.
I hope that when you go back home today or tomorrow, that you start listening to young people and that you take us seriously. I think that's really important. It's not about what you have done or what should have been done, but please listen to us, because in that way, maybe we won't be able to believe it, but at least we can hope that change will come.
Thank you so much. And the last word goes to you, Angela, your best wish.
Take bold and inclusive climate action, and Fridays for Future is going to back you up. It's going to build the political momentum for you to do everything. And again, yeah, that's it.
That concludes this panel up here. I think very, very clear 5 wishes. Don't lose hope. More political courage, please. You are not alone. The dots must be joined. Please start listening and take the young people seriously and come up with bold and inclusive solutions. Thank you to all of you. Thank you. Thank you. And with that, we have come to our very last agenda point. And what we're going to witness now is actually a first. Namely, it's the first time that our next keynote speaker speaks outside her own country as a congresswoman. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a third-generation Bronxite. She's an educator and organizer serving the 14th District of New York in the Bronx and Queens. The Congresswoman grew up experiencing the reality of New York's rising income inequality, inspiring her to organize her community and run for office on a progressive platform rejecting corporate PAC funds back in the United States. In June last year, AOC defeated the 10-term incumbent, to become the Democratic nominee for the 14th district, and she went on to make history in November last year as the youngest woman ever to be elected to Congress at the age of 29 years old. Since her swearing in to Congress in January this year, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez has made the fight against climate change and the new Green Deal cornerstones of her political work. I'm not in doubt that you will join me in welcoming Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez on stage. We are very, very pleased to lead to you.
Thank you, Ms. Hedegaard, for the introduction. Thank you to C40 and the City of Copenhagen for welcoming me and everyone in this movement to your city. And I'd especially like to thank the activists and advocates, indigenous peoples, scientists, and climate realists who are largely responsible for making this moment happen. I'd also like to thank the mayors, officials, and everyday people who are joining us here and watching from afar today. I was honestly a little bit surprised and incredibly humbled to be invited here today to speak on the issue of the climate crisis and the Green New Deal. Back in the United States, many of us advocating on this issue have garnered a bit of a reputation as troublemakers and radicals. So in that spirit, I will not waste much time, and I want to move to speak with candor, frank honesty, truth, and frankly, scientific consensus. It's no secret that we are meeting here today at a very perilous juncture, a crossroads, one of extinction or opportunity. And every decision we make between now and in our children's lifetimes will determine how human life will fare, whether we suffer greatly or build together. It is our choice. To the chagrin of many of the politicians and voters, I am sad to report that there is no middle road on the climate crisis. We will either address the problem meaningfully and in accordance with scientific consensus, or we will not. The statement is not a matter of radicalism, it is a matter of fact, of policy, and of science. And many of the decisions we make, particularly as executives and policymakers, will either contribute to destruction or preservation. And that contribution is measured in the form of emissions, injustice, and inequality. As elected officials, we have an obligation to tell the truth. And in many different junctures and moments, we have not. Not on this issue, not fully, and certainly not in our policy. Many of us have read the science, have been briefed by the world's experts, and have seen the projections and implications in our communities. Yet we speak in broad terms, as though we do not know the things that we know. We do not speak often enough about this crisis in real, human, understandable terms. And that impulse is understandable. Because when we speak in the terms that scientists are urging us to, we can be easily labeled as alarmists, or, if you are not a man, hysterical. In my own community in the United States, in New York City, all three major airports servicing the world's most complex airspace are projected to be flooded, in part or whole, by 2080. That is given our current trajectory and accounting for optimism in our actions. Through the fault of human cognitive bias, which lulls us into discounting the value of our future, The year 2080 seems like an abstraction. But if I were to have a child in the next few years, he, she, or they will have to contend with a world where some of our most precious critical infrastructure goes underwater, or our most staple and widely used crops struggle to grow and feed our population. Even if we don't want to think about our children, we can think about ourselves. By 2030, according to researchers at the University of Washington-Madison and the University of Oregon, quote, seawater is likely to submerge some 4,000 miles of internet cable in the United States and engulf more than 1,000 data centers that house servers, routers, and other hardware by the end of this decade. And that is just in our privileged pocket of some of the wealthiest areas in the most privileged nations in the world. Money alone will not save us. And right now, federal governments are failing to act. The United States, to the horror of the world, withdrew from the Paris Agreement. But despite that, many of the other actors in charge of some of the most advanced and wealthiest economies have withdrawn from the agreement in action. Not a single one is on track to meet their Paris goals. Deeper still, we don't have to project 1 minute into our future to see that the climate crisis is already here. On this note, I speak to you not as an elected official or public figure, but I speak to you as a human being, a woman whose dreams of motherhood now taste bittersweet because of what I know about our children's future, and that our actions are responsible for bringing their most dire possibilities into focus. I speak to you as a daughter and descendant of colonized peoples who have already begun to suffer. Just 2 years ago, one of the deadliest disasters in the United States struck in the form of Hurricane Maria. The climate change-powered storm killed over 3,000 Puerto Ricans, American citizens. My own grandfather died in the aftermath, all because they were living under colonial rule, which contributed to the dire conditions and lack of recovery. This year, we saw Hurricane Dorian wreak similar ravage in the Bahamas. And that is not a coincidence. As many have noticed noted in an awful turn, the climate crisis's path is first impacting those who have not only contributed to our emissions the least, but have already suffered greatly in the global history of inequality, colonization, and imperialism, stacking one injustice upon another. But this is everyone's loss, too. And no person is insulated from this reality, because many of the people ravaged and marginalized in our current regimes, the lineages of farmers, indigenous peoples, and tightly knit communities, also have knowledge of many of the practices that are our solutions as well. So it is no secret that many of our scientific conclusions reinforce indigenous wisdom and practices cultivated over thousands of years. It is not a coincidence that these disasters get relatively little media coverage, and that even less of the coverage dares to mention climate change. It is not a coincidence that the truth is controversial. None of this is a coincidence, because climate change is not a coincidence or a scientific anomaly. Climate change is a consequence. It is a consequence of our unsustainable way of life, because it is unsustainable to organize our society as we have, centered on prioritizing personal gain and profit over any and all human or planetary considerations. It is unsustainable to naively believe that building a wall can shield ourselves from humanity's collective destiny. It is unsustainable to promote amnesia around gross injustices and ignorance of our past, to abdicate responsibility simply because it was our ancestors who committed them and not us. Our children bear responsibility for our inaction, despite the fact that they didn't make the choice. And frankly, it is unsustainable to continue to believe that our system of runaway, unaccountable, law-breaking pursuit of profit, whose inequality is so socially destabilizing that it is giving rise to authoritarians who burn our forests and challenge the democracies that listen to basic science, and to think that that has nothing to do with this. It is unsurprising that this juncture coincides with a political moment of stark contrasts, that we must choose whether this moment will lead us to regression or evolution, authoritarianism or greater democracy, extraction or preservation. Our greatest choice is to move towards a cooperative, collaborative world that aligns with scientific consensus, whose economies center and benefit the middle and lower classes and the marginalized, which is to say, most people, and who honor the inherent value of all human dignity and can put everyone to work. All of this means that rising to the challenge of the climate crisis demands not only that we act meaningfully, but also that we change society. The two are inextricable. Our current logic created this mess, and operating in the same way will not get us out. Changing society for the better is the most sustainable thing we can do, and meeting the climate crisis will require the largest economic mobilization we may have ever tried to pursue as a human species. And that is what a Green New Deal is all about. Preserving our planet with a just transition focused on economic opportunity, jobs and justice, peace and prosperity. Simply put, to get the job done, much of the industrialized world, the developing world, the global south, all of us, will have to retrofit many of our buildings, change and update our energy grids, educate a labor pool in a myriad of different skills and capacities, work with regions to create just transitions for impacted workers and communities, and pursue some of the most ambitious civil engineering society has ever seen. And that should not be daunting, intimidating, or lead us to despair. It should be inspiring. Because this is the work of advancing societies. And we have been entrusted by the public to pursue it. To do any less is to stall or regress. We have two choices, to move forwards or backwards. Many of the places that will require attention and investment first are the frontline communities that have been historically neglected. Rural areas, poor urban areas, indigenous lands. Again, this is not a coincidence or even a form of affirmative action. It is common sense. We have already invested virtually everywhere else, and much of those places will enjoy continued attention due to their existing political and economic power. Now we must invest in the places left behind to not only catch up, but leapfrog to the future. And much of this work of this scale has been done before. It is possible. We have mobilized on a massive scale for war, and our only test of leadership is if we have the political will to mobilize on that scale for anything else. At the present moment, solving the climate crisis is no longer a primarily scientific question. It is now a political one. The scientists have done much of their job, and now it is the time for us to do ours. Just as they have created the technologies and identified the targets, we must create the political will. A Green New Deal centers the leadership of frontline communities, from miners to farmers, to indigenous communities, working and poor communities, and urban communities alike, not only because it is the right thing to do, it is, nor because it is where we can find solutions, we can, but also because it is the winning political coalition that can empower change. The Green New Deal is an economic boon for the many that contrasts with the current profits of planetary extraction that benefit the very few. And with that, I think we have our work cut out for us. But to paraphrase a prior US president who pioneered the original New Deal, forged in a time of great economic desperation, quote, "We face the arduous days that lie before us in the warm courage of global unity, with the clear consciousness of seeking old and precious moral values. We do not distrust the future of essential democracy. The people have not failed. In their need, they have registered a mandate that they want direct, vigorous action. They have asked for discipline and direction under leadership. They have made us the present instrument of their wishes, and in the spirit of that gift, we should take it. In this dedication of a world, we humbly ask for a blessing. May we be protected, each and every one of us, and may we be guided in the days to come. Thank you very much.
Well, I don't know about you, but somehow I think that the US Congress deserves a voice like this. So, I think this name, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, we better learn this name because I'm sure that it's a name we will meet really many times also in the future. And for those who are interested, AOC will speak at the end of the march at the town hall taking place when we have finished here. So, ladies and gentlemen, this almost concludes these 2 days. But wait, there are still some treats for you up here. But I just want to once again thank all the sponsors, thanks to the media partners, thanks to all of you attending here in person, but also in cyberspace. And before we get to the last clue up here, please join me in a big round of applause for the team that has worked so hard to make such a fantastic program for you. This is really a prof team, I must say. It has been a pleasure to work with you, and I think everybody have felt your professionalism. I know that you're going to party tonight, and I wonder whether you will have any energy left to party. But now let me invite back on stage for the last big farewell show, the Lord Mayors Jensen and Hidalgo, and then thank you for me.
Thank you so much, dear colleagues, dear friends, dear climate activists. Are you here? I can't hear you. Are you here? Are there any troublemakers here? Boo! Thank you so much. It has been amazing. An amazing experience for us to host the C40 Global Mayor Summit 2019 here in our city, Copenhagen. Thank you all for attending. When we talk, the world listens. When we act, the world will follow us and our examples. When we united, we can make the difference. This summit has been about how we can reach our ambitious goals. Through collaboration between cities, businesses, civil societies, academia, and not least our citizens, to succeed with the deadline 2020 goals. It has truly been inspiring, and I have been inspired by the award-winning solutions from Guangzhou, the electrifying of the buses, from Accra with informal waste collection. I also hope that you have been inspired by staying here in our city, Copenhagen. Maybe you have taken your time to bike around in our city, or maybe you had had a swim in our clean, but perhaps little cold harbor. I would like to close this summit by stating that there is still time to act. But there's no more moment to wait. There's no more room for empty promises, and there are no more room for not acting. We need to listen to the call from our citizens and from the young people in the streets. Ladies and gentlemen, now everybody from the C40 youth delegation, please join Anna and me here at stage. Please come up here, all of you, and give them a big round of applause. To the C40 youth panel here at stage, thank you for your hard work for highlighting the climate emergency. And now let us go and join the climate march. Let's show the young people that we heard their messages and we are ready to act. Thank you very much for joining us in Copenhagen, all of you. See you at City Hall Square.
Tak for et rigtig godt event.